Welcome to the Big Brain Podcast. I'm Larry Cermak, president of The Block, and I'm joined by Namik, who's the CSO of MegaETH. We have Jack here today, and we're going to be talking about 21. We're going to be talking about Bitcoin adoption, Lightning, central banks looking at Bitcoin, a lot of topics we have ahead of us. So welcome, Jack.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Congrats on the podcast, by the way.
Appreciate it. You are one of the first, I think, 5 guests, so we hope this is going to be a good conversation. But why don't we just start with, talking a little bit about where you came from, Jack. You definitely are on the younger side, and you've accomplished a shit ton in that time. So I would love for our audience that maybe have not heard of you yet to just get a quick overview of kind of how you got here.
Yeah, I mean, this question for me is always hilarious because the joke about my background is I don't really have one. I'm American, as you can probably tell by my accent. I'm from Chicago, middle of America. And I'm a classic college dropout, turned engineer, and have kind of iterated my way through my career to get to where I am. I probably think the most relevant piece of my background when it comes to Bitcoin and financial markets is my father, my relationship with my dad. So my grandfather was actually the youngest ever chairman of the Chicago Board of Trade. And which no longer exists anymore, by the way. There's the CME, CBOT, but my family history of finance kind of goes back here specifically in Chicago, which is a very different financial market than New York, and we could talk about that. My dad founded a discount futures brokerage here in Chicago, so he sold it to Man Financial when I was going into kindergarten, I think, when I was around 5. So my dad was a stay-at-home dad, raised me, and it was sports and financial markets. And so I grew up a hyper-competitive kid that was really close to his father and always relatively understood finance. And so when I dropped out of college, my dad had already wasted, I don't know how much a tuition was exactly, but I don't know, call it 20, 30 grand of just money down the drain. And I was an idiot and I had no direction. And like being good at basketball when you're 18, you realize as soon as you turn 19, like doesn't mean shit. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do. And my dad was like, I think you should get into this Bitcoin thing with me. And so that was when my journey started. This was early 2013. And through that became a developer actually. Before I was an executive or CEO person, I was an engineer. And yeah, now I'm where I am now.
Before we get into Bitcoin, you played basketball competitively?
Yeah, I always joke with my buddies, like, Satoshi is the one that made me 5'8", 150 pounds, because if I was 6'4", 240, I'd be on the Chicago Bulls. But yeah, I was good. As a kid, I was just small. But I played, basketball, baseball, football. I was a nationally ranked chess player growing up. I have a couple state championships here in the state of Illinois for my age group. So I really just pride myself on my competitiveness. And I think there's a lot of attraction there to Bitcoin. To me, it's like the biggest game humanity is playing right now. And, I have always tried to pride myself on, being on the winning team and competing at the highest level. And I think that was a lot of the attraction as well. But I've competed in name beer pong. I was a competitor, anything.
I will tell you one thing, which is funny. You mentioned being 6'4" and you would make it to the NBA. I played basketball for like 15 years of my life as well. I'm 6'11", and I didn't make it to the NBA. So I'm one of these people, where they say the stat of like, well, if you're 7 feet, you have like a 10% chance to make it to the league. So I'm one of those people, basically. Somehow didn't make it, but also competitive, and basketball got me scholarships and stuff like that. So at least I utilize it to that, but yeah, you said it correctly. It's even if you're competitive, even if you're great, it's really, really difficult to make it to the top level.
Yeah,
it's nearly impossible, even for like tall, talented people. Not saying I was super talented, but regardless, it's and it's ridiculous that you were nationally ranked in chess. Like that is fucking impressive.
Yeah, that was my dad's logic at the time. 18-year-old comes home, And I mean, listen, I'm crying. All my buddies are at. I went to university to try and pursue a career in chess, and it didn't work. And I would ditch class every single. My university was in New York, and I would ditch class every single day, and I would train to Washington Square Park or Times Square and play chess with the homeless people in New York. And so eventually, obviously, I'm flunking out, and I call my dad, and I'm like, man, this is bad. He takes me home. All my buddies are in the big state universities, University of Illinois, University of Indiana, University of California, and they're posting pictures with all the hot chicks, and they're having the most fun, and they're making friends, and I'm not, and I'm in my basement. And my dad was like, what am I supposed to do with my son? And he would bring me to the boxing gym every morning. Just, you got to get out of the basement. You got to see the sun. You got to work hard. Just challenge yourself, at least physically. Everyone can do that. And one of the guys at the boxing gym was an engineer. He was an engineer at Apple, Adobe, had like very, very impressive engineering background. And I would play him in chess, and I would kick his ass. Sorry, can I curse on here?
Yeah, you can.
Okay, cool. You guys mentioned casual. So I would kick his ass, and he was like, who is this kid? Like, at the offices, I'm the best chess player. And so then through that sparked this idea of, hey, maybe coding and chess have some overlap. And then my dad was stacking sats at the time, and that's kind of how that all started. So I'm very grateful for chess for a variety of reasons, and it's still something I play every single day.
Is your relationship with your dad still like as close? And now looking back, obviously drop out of college, like you kind of were finding yourself. You obviously think that was the right decision right now, right? Like looking back, and does your dad agree with that?
Yes, I mean 100%. I've got the best dad in the world. I mean, to get a call saying, hey man, I haven't been going to class, I've been getting in fights, I've been playing chess in the parks, and for him to say, all right, come home, let's figure out your place in this world. I mean, that's a hell of a best friend and also a father. And something that I've learned in my own journey is that there are times in your life where you need people that love you the most to believe in you even more than you believe in yourself. I found those to be the most critical times. And my father has always played that role for me. When you're 18 and you're not passing class and you're lost on direction and you don't know what you want to be when you grow up. I mean, I was sitting in Queens, New York, taking French literature, and I was lost. And to have, a father that, believed in me always more than I could have ever believed in myself, and was not going to give up on me. Come on, how lucky am I for that? So yeah, and what we ended up building was this little tiny, like, in hindsight, like Bitcoin family office. It was even before Bitcoin traded up like it has. He got my stepmom into Bitcoin and I into Bitcoin. So he registered her the Bitcoin Twitter handle, the Bitcoin Mom.
Oh, wow.
And I think she has 30,000 followers or something. But, at the time it was a big deal for us because he was like, everyone thinks Bitcoin is for drug dealers, but it's also for moms. And, you're such a loving and caring and sweet person that we should set up meetups and we should show people that, normal people can use Bitcoin too. And so that was her role. And she started the first meetup in Chicago. And I remember coming home from coding boot camp and Andreas Antonopoulos was in my living room. And then my role ended up being the engineer. And my dad was the trader, and we were kind of this team together. And it was funny because then you have things like the block size wars. And, my job was to explain, hey, this is what's happening and this is what I think. And I think Bitcoin Cash is a really bad idea. And I think Lightning is the way to actually scale it. And so then we would, trade that and get rid of our Bitcoin Cash. And we operated like a little team. And then Bitcoin went up enough where they're sitting on an ocean somewhere without doxing them. And I started some companies.
Yeah, things have grown a lot since back then. You have started a couple companies. Would love to kind of learn a bit about Strike and 21.
Yeah, Strike, it's interesting, was just a natural evolution kind of on the back half of that story. So picture 18 years old. I'm trying to teach myself to code. I'm going to these one-off boot camps in Chicago, and I just wanted to be part of the Bitcoin story. You know, when Andreas Antonopoulos and your father explained to you that this is a revolutionary technology, and you realize that the revenue model is just it working. Everyone's like, how are you going to make money? It's like, well, if the price goes up. And so I wanted to help. I wanted to just be a part of it. And, you know, especially as a college dropout, but I think the story of all humans is you just want to be part of something bigger than yourself, whether that's family, whether that's a business, whether that's an idea. And so I wanted to contribute. I applied to every single business. I applied to Coinbase. I applied to, back in the day, BitPay, ChangeTip. You know, you guys can probably Google these. I got rejected by all of them. So then I kind of found myself as an open source contributor and just hacking around on things like the 21 computer founded by Balaji had just come out. And I was just hacking on stuff. And it got to the point where I turned into a good engineer. So very grateful for the open source community and especially Bitcoin, like very inviting, always room for people to contribute. And then through that, you know, I found myself in this like Lightning Network block size war debate where I was a real contributor in a contentious part of Bitcoin's history. And I'd started this wallet called Zap. So we're talking 2013 to 2017. And now I'm building an open source project that I founded with a real purpose. And I was a good enough engineer where I have customers and people are paying attention to my opinions. And I was very confident that we should not change the consensus rules on Bitcoin. That was going to be lethal to the project, and that scaling in layers was the technically sound thing to do. And that was my first kind of founding chapter, but it wasn't a business. It was an open source project. And it was through that when you actually get users and people give you feedback and you understand how people are using Bitcoin and the hole in the market. And one of the biggest learnings for me is that no one was focused on Bitcoin as much as I thought they were. You know, like Coinbase in that era wasn't really focused on Bitcoin at all. They supported every single possible Bitcoin fork. They grew much more of an interest in things like Ethereum. And listen, like you can read their shareholder letters on a quarterly basis. It's a phenomenal business. And we're not going to get into like the political like religion around this stuff. But the reality is they wanted a, you know, multi-token world and they weren't focused on Bitcoin. And it was this weird epiphany I had in that moment where I was like, wait, what the hell? You know, you would assume that someone would have created like the Bitcoin company that's focused on Bitcoin financial services and doing Bitcoin the best. Like, well, when I got into Bitcoin, surely Mt. Gox was going to be that. Well, nope, that didn't happen. And then surely Coinbase was going to figure that out. And then surely Binance had the lead. And then I was sitting here as this kid, as like the Bitcoin guy building the Bitcoin stuff for Bitcoiners. And so then I ended up incorporating what I was working on and bringing the open source developers onto payroll and building exactly that. And, you know, a lot of our initial stuff was Lightning, but then people wanted to buy Bitcoin from us. Then people wanted to borrow against their Bitcoin from us. And just our deathly focus on, you know, this is a $2.5 trillion asset now, which is a top 5 asset in the world. And people want high quality financial services from someone they can trust. And that somehow became us. And so, you know, I actually don't know if we've ever talked about our lending numbers publicly because the product was launched less than 3 months ago, really. But we're already one of the biggest retail lenders in the world. Our loan book is like 9 figures deep, like well into the 9 figures deep.
Congrats.
Yeah, we do a tremendous amount of retail brokerage volume with a lot of the LPs we work with. We're either right behind or somewhere in between the Cash App Robinhoods of the world. So a very deep retail brokerage business. We have dollar, pound, euro, and now Aussie dollar. And then we support Tether and we span over 100 markets. So we've become a Bitcoin financial services company that monetizes financial services as opposed to speculation. Like we do not have like options or leverage or a bunch of other tokens. Our customers come to us because they find utility in our financial services centered around Bitcoin, I guess. And that's the Strike business.
And Jack, can you talk a little bit about El Salvador? I obviously played a relatively large role in them onboarding Bitcoin in a meaningful way, and as well as providing some of the technology. How did you get in that position? And what are some of the learnings that you have from that? How does kind of governments think about Bitcoin by itself?
Yeah, I mean, so I just founded Strike, and part of our early thesis. Listen, when you're starting a business, you need to be different. You're trying to find product market fit. I think initially I thought that was going to be Lightning for us. It wasn't. Lightning is a growing business line for us, but if you were to delete our Lightning volume from our business, I probably wouldn't even notice. It's just small. But at the time, I had this thesis and we were going to be different, and I was an expert more than anyone else in the world. And so part of the idea was remittance, cross-border payments. I mean, if I can physically move value anywhere in the world less than a second for free, surely that's very disruptive. So I bought a one-way ticket to El Salvador because there was a Bitcoin community there known as Bitcoin Beach, and they were going to let me pilot my product. El Salvador is a very popular remittance corridor to and from America because it was such a dangerous country at the time. So what you would have is young men leave El Salvador, go to America, and if we're being honest with ourselves, we're talking about like South Florida, and you're bussing tables, you're doing low hourly wage work, and you need to get the money back home. What was fascinating about this remittance market is not only were the fees high and people had a tough time accessing really good services like Chase Bank remittance because they couldn't even get a bank account, but fascinatingly, they were priced out of the market entirely. It was similar to Robinhood, where Robinhood not only made trading cheaper, but they unlocked a new trader because a minimum brokerage fee to trade used to be $10, $20, $30. So if you wanted to buy $5 worth of Tesla, not only was it expensive for you, you couldn't be part of the capital markets because the fees just literally priced you out. And it was similar for this remittance corridor, is that like if someone had $10, $20 of cash after a Friday night that they wanted to get home to their Salvadoran family, they literally couldn't find a remittance corridor that didn't have a minimum fee of at least 50. Western Union will say like fees as low as 50 basis points, but that's if you're remitting 500 grand. And so what my idea was not only to make fees cheaper and the remittance experience faster, but also unlock a new remitter, which was people that just didn't have that much money. And so that was the idea. And we launched the pilot and it became super popular. And to be totally honest with you guys, the remittance piece was popular, but also we were using USDT on the like El Salvador side because there's no banking APIs in El Salvador still to this day. And so what we were doing is the El Salvador side would receive the USDT and there were physical people, including myself, that would stand and give you cash in exchange for the tethers and vice versa. And so then we also became popular because we were a USDT wallet and people were like, whoa, what is this USDT thing? And then we would allow you to swap USDT for Bitcoin. And so then people started trading. So the app just got popular. I think we were the #1 app in the App Store at one point. And I got a DM from the president's brother on Twitter. I was sitting in a sushi restaurant and it was so long. It was like a novel about philosophy, about, culture, about energy. It was a beautifully written, the most beautifully written Twitter DM I've ever received. I don't know how much that says about my Twitter DMs, but it was like unbelievable. I thought it was fake, obviously. And then at the very end, it was, we need to meet you. And I was nervous. It's at the time, dangerous country. There's all sorts of opinions on Bukele. And right. Is he a bad guy? Is he a good guy? So I'm terrified. I asked them, can I have a week to meet you guys? And I'm calling my investors. I'm calling my dad. And they said, no, you have 24 hours. And here's the latitude, longitude. So it wasn't even an address. It was like a dot on a map. So then, I called my dad and I said, listen, man, if this is how I go out, not bad. And I love you. And I had some buddies of mine that were with me just helping out. So one still works for me. He's my chief of staff at both 21 and Strike. And the other I just went to high school with. And so we had a setup where my chief of staff was at the hotel and was going to call like the US embassy if I didn't come back. And then the other buddy came with me. And so that we would have like a relay back. But all of that didn't matter because I walked into the meeting and they were the best and the coolest and the most visionary. And I stray away so far from politics, both US, El Salvador politics. It's not my thing. I've never voted. I find it useless. I bleed orange. That's my contribution. But I can talk my personal experience, and it was awesome. We listened to music and they talked about the future of the country. Bitcoin was like 10% of the meeting. It was like they wanted to be the Latin American Singapore in a way. Really tough on crime, really clean, a focus on technology. They understood that the best way to make progress was to attract talent. And so they talked about regulations and laws that they wanted to do differently than other people. And then Bitcoin to them was one, a focus on hard money. They had lost their currency in a civil war and they were on the dollar. And they figured, a way to build wealth for the people, for the country, was to own an asset that should appreciate and that was hard. They talked about the volcano stuff and that it was a very rich country in natural resources, but had a difficult time monetizing it. Like, one of the greater exports that they're known for is like coffee, but they have these volcanoes and they have these natural resources and they're right on the water. And so the real estate should be better. And, would Bitcoiners buy real estate and all this stuff? And then there was the idea of making it legal tender, which to them and I was very obvious because, El Salvador doesn't have access to Google engineers or MIT professors or Jack Dorsey or Michael Saylor, but they do now if you buy into this open network. It was the most beautiful part of the idea is that they can just be a part of what all the other smart, rich Larry Finks are now working on. So anyways, that's like, sorry for the long-winded story, but that's literally what happened. It was a one-way ticket to pilot our product, turned into a, hey, I can help you guys think about Bitcoin the right way, turned into, let's announce it at the Bitcoin conference, turned into, I'm crying and there's snot everywhere. And that's what happened.
Is El Salvador how you get closer to Tether and Paolo? Because I know obviously they're pretty active in the region as well. They're doing some mining over there, and you mentioned USDT a few times. Is that how you guys met, or was that before?
No, I would say Paolo and Giancarlo and Tether got interested in El Salvador after that story. And so obviously, listen, I'm a Bitcoiner. My dad, we talk about the relationship with my father, hard money, free markets. I mean, the Chicago guys in particular were very rebellious against regulation, against government. I mean, these guys created a lot of the derivative contracts that we all use in financial markets today were created by guys like my grandfather because, at the end of the day, they were invented as risk transfer. It's like, take the risk away from the corn farmer. He should just focus on farming the corn because the things that go in our belly, like agriculture commodities, the commodities that we consume, they should be well produced and they should not be speculating. I shouldn't have diarrhea because the corn is bad because they're worried it's going to rain. That's bad. So let's create a market and create financial products where we could transfer the risk to an efficient place and leave the corn farmer to just farm the corn. And so anyways, like I would say I come from this culture of like high integrity, free markets, competition, principles, like all of those things. And I brought that to El Salvador as a Bitcoiner and they aligned with that. So like El Salvador was like, we shouldn't tax Bitcoiners. We should be free market maximalists. We all aligned there. And I think Paolo and Giancarlo and Tether and Bitcoiners, like El Salvador got put on the map for all these people after that moment anyway. So, I come from a hard money maximalist family before Satoshi wrote the white paper. I brought that to El Salvador, and then I think that unlocked a lot of like-minded folks. But I knew Paolo long before. I mean, it's funny, man. Bitcoin is so big now. It wasn't big in 2013.
I remember. Yeah.
It just wasn't. So, I have a Bitfinex account. Like, I can't really use it anymore because I'm an American. But back in the day, like, I had a Bitfinex account. I knew those guys. You go to the conferences and the meetups, there's only so many people there. So I've known them forever. I forget when Paulo actually joined as an engineer and became the CTO, but I've just known him for a long time. And whether it's open source projects, like Bitfinex was the first exchange that integrated Lightning. Like people forget that.
Yep.
And so how big was the Lightning Network community at the time? Like 4 people. And so of course I knew Paulo, and we were in the same Slack channels or IRC chats talking about Lightning and how to do stuff. So I've just known them through being Bitcoiners, and I know they've gotten a lot of flack over the years, and I've never really understood it because to me they've just been really smart, driven Bitcoiners, and then turned like phenomenally successful businessmen. And when I did all the El Salvador stuff, it was super interesting to them because we're like-minded in that way. Oh, here's a country that wants to promote technology, innovation. They're creating a regulatory framework that's appealing to the businesses that we run, like Strike, like Tether. And there's a government that's open to thinking about new ideas and things like stable coins and what they were working on. So I think that chapter of their business came after, Naib was very forward about wanting businesses like Tether to be domiciled there.
Before we get into the treasury stuff, which obviously we want to talk about for a long time, you have a pretty big role there as well.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about, in general, like government's role in holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet and central banks holding Bitcoin? Do you think that's a trend that will continue happening in the future? Like it was kind of, I remember 3 years ago, maybe it was a larger topic, but there's still central banks like the Czech Republic one that are considering it. And it seems like, to me at least, like an obvious path that in 10 years, it will be viewed like something that central banks do. Do you think that as well? Or are you like one of those people that thinks, well, governments shouldn't really take part in Bitcoin?
No. I mean, well, obviously I'm not one of those folks. I advise the government to be a part of Bitcoin. Well, first of all, I think Bitcoin is like a public utility. I find it funny. There's a park there's a park outside my house. And if I were to go to the park to tan and someone else goes to the park to play with their son and someone else goes to the park to set up a picnic, who's right? Who's using the park the wrong way? Trick question, nobody. And I would never be sitting in the park with my shirt off, getting a tan and yelling at someone having a picnic or playing catch with their son and saying, you're using this thing the wrong way. It's a public utility. It's in the eye of the beholder. The utility lies within who's using it. So I find that with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a public open network and you can use it how you want to use it. You can buy it if you want to buy it. That's the point. So government, Wall Street, individuals, I'm definitely not one of the people that says, hey, who let them into Bitcoin? Kick them out. I actually find that phenomenally stupid. On the topic of governments and central banks, I kid you not, after El Salvador, obviously every media was like, who's next? And you look up a map and you're like, okay, well, El Salvador's here, so it's got to be Panama, right? I'm like, nope, I actually don't, I wouldn't wage a bet on that. And they're like, oh, well, then it's Argentina, right? Because of Malay. I'm like, no, I honestly don't think that either. My intuition was the United States. I swear to you, because, El Salvador didn't have their own currency. So they didn't have a central bank. They couldn't print money. Money is your time and energy in abstracted form. So by proxy, printing money is literally printing time and energy. It's like the closest thing to time travel in a weird philosophical way. And so the ability to forgive that is insane. And El Salvador didn't have to forgive that. People forget that part of the story. They had a leader that was very young, very popular, has a lot of influence and control, and also didn't have his own currency. So that's why it was a perfect storm and a perfect story for them to be first. If a country was going to, who could print money and who does have a central bank adopt Bitcoin, I thought it was going to be the United States because they are the world reserve currency. The very nature of the Triffin's dilemma and the fact that they run these twin deficits and that they're in so much debt, neutral reserve assets are naturally attractive to them. The United States in their position of gold, it's a big part of, a lot of the US debt is, backing future promises, whether that's with growth, with technology, with the military, with gold. And I figured Bitcoin would become a part of that story. And so that I remain holding that opinion. I do think that the United States will be the next material part of how governments think about Bitcoin, and they will be the ones that adopt it first for a variety of reasons. I think Bitcoin is very American in the ideals sense. Like, to me, America is one of the most popular startups of all time. Before it's a country, it's an idea. And the American idea and the Bitcoin idea, I think, are very similar. There's, everyone's treated equal, freedom in coming and going, freedom in opining, freedom of speech, like all of these core fundamental, democratic human principles, I think both ideas share. So I thought it aligned very well with America's innovative, technology first, idealist, philosophy. And then more practically speaking, the dollar has to get debased against something. We have to expunge our debt. We can't raise rates, and we can't reduce our spending. And so, Bitcoin, gold, like, what are neutral assets that can play a role in the transition out of the chapter America's found itself in? And I always thought Bitcoin was going to play a role there. So that's my opinion. I'm sure other countries will adopt it in like Bhutan, for example. But I don't know. To me, I don't know. To what degree does that count? Didn't they have like a Terra Luna position or something? So, to me, all eyes are on the United States.
Yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in Azerbaijan, right? So a large thesis for why I kind of concluded in crypto is because I watched firstly I watched Azerbaijani manat devalue by around 70-80% in the span of a few months. And then secondly, I saw the second order effect of like US printing on emerging markets, right? So I think that's for when the world reserve is the dollar and you're effectively relying on fiscal policy, which you do not control yourself, right? You might just wake up one day and be like, wow, I'm in trouble. So I can definitely relate to a lot of what you're saying. And I'm going to love to touch on some of your theses on Bitcoin as like the next evolution of American society and then subsequently American hegemony. But before we get into that, are you spending a lot of time in DC these days? Like, are you going to run back El Salvador? That's the real question.
I mean, my position with El Salvador and with anybody, and I'm being dead serious, it's not a political answer, is like, here's my phone number, call me if you want my opinion. And it's always been that way. And so, the funny part about the El Salvador story is that was how we ended our first meeting. And there was no like, now we go legal tender. It was like, here's what I think. I think I'm right, but I don't run the country. You do. So here's my phone number and just let me know if I can help. I flew back to Chicago. And then 2 days later, they called and said, you can help, come back. And so that's what happened. And it's very similar to my relationship with DC or my relationship with Wall Street. Is I want to spend my life giving Bitcoin the best chance to succeed. I want Bitcoin to have the chance I believe it deserves to change the world. And, I'm one dude, and so I don't try and over-exaggerate my role in that. But I try my best to participate, and that's it. And, if you're a president or you're a CEO or you're a congressperson, just give me a call if you think you value my opinion. So that's been my role. Yes, I talk to people in DC or senators or Congress folks or whatever. So I would say the answer to your question, yeah, but Twitter shouldn't blow it out of proportion. I'm a dude that has opinions and I'm happy to share them, and I have a view on how the world should go. I have a view on what's best for the things I care about. And we'll see what happens.
If we see a world where the US completely shuns Bitcoin, obviously it takes a lot longer for Bitcoin to kind of establish as this ultimate backstop to everything. But it's a scenario in which it does happen anyways. I think everyone on this call agrees. And it's the scenario in which the US is it's relatively a lot weaker than it is today, right? And I've seen a thread of yours, which was effectively arguing the counterpoint, the counterfactual, which will be, well, what would happen if the US actually relied on Bitcoin for its next leg of growth, right? And to further, entrench itself and its value set globally. I'd love to hear your opinion orthogonal of that of stable coins, right? I think a lot of people have discussed how USDT is good for USD, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on like Bitcoin and America.
Yeah. Well, for me, I think you have to humanize where America is. We these numbers are so big, and it feels like such a gargantuan topic that's like a ball of spaghetti, and that no one totally understands it. For me, just taking a step back, a lot of the monetary era we were living in now was born in this post-World Wars time. So, the world got in a huge fight twice, and it was really bad and devastating for everyone. No one wins a world war. As an American, you grow up and you go to history class, you're like, we won. Yeah, but then you get old enough and realize nobody wins those. Those are bad. But for all
mandatory shell, Soviet Union helped as well there.
Yeah. I mean,
just saying.
Totally. There's all sorts of, pieces and parts of the story that winners write history, right? But then there's the truth that's somewhere in there, and we're probably still discovering pieces of that if we're all being honest. But the point for this podcast for me is the United States came out in a position of strength. We had the strongest economy, we had the strongest manufacturing base, and then we also had the most gold. We had everyone's gold. And so I think that was a really important piece. And so the structural idea at the time, so call it 100 years ago, was, hey, the US can help everyone get back on its feet. We will let you guys produce stuff for us so that you can have local jobs, local business, real exports, and we will export you our strength through our currency. So how do we export you the strength of our economy and the fact that we have all this gold? And so we'll export you the dollar and we'll import your stuff. And everyone knows the Triffin's dilemma and that's not a sustainable model at all. But it wasn't intended to be at the time. It was supposed to be hey, let's all get back on our feet. And it worked. I mean, it drove a lot of growth around the world, and people could export stuff to the American consumer. Now, there were all sorts of beneficial pieces that America took advantage of, like we would only import raw materials and then we'd have jobs here to actually finalize them for the American consumer. So we would take advantage at every step of the way. But anyways, that's the agreement. Fast forward, we keep being fiscally irresponsible. We keep going to war like in Vietnam, and we're printing money and we're printing money and we're printing money, to where it was France in particular, but more broadly, everyone was like, well, this seems interesting. There's no way there's gold that backs all the dollars you guys are spending. We want our gold back. And in 1971, America said, joke's on you. Your gold is our gold. Have fun with these pieces of paper. Oh, and by the way, if you don't like that, you can meet our military. Let us know if you'd want that to be arranged.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, whoa, I definitely don't want to go through what happened in the world wars where we all die and get decimated. So fair enough. Put the guns down. And, that then chapter, now we're entering an era where we're literally printing pieces of paper and exchanging it for real stuff, real goods and services, and the debt explodes. And you have these eras of the US trying to cement itself with the petrodollar. Petro short for petroleum, oil. I mean, we had a relationship with Saudi Arabia. Hey, if you guys price your oil in dollars, the marginal producer of the thing that runs the world, you price it in dollars, we'll make sure that you have weapons and military to go fuck people up, given that you need to. Long story short, we find ourselves now in a fiscal position where we have just been printing pieces of paper with no real backing in return for real stuff. China is the world's factory. China last year ran $1 trillion trade surplus, meaning they got $1 trillion US store credits last year. You cannot take a trade surplus like that and go shopping in your country. You're going to strengthen your local economy. You're going to strengthen the currency. You're going to ruin your exports. So you have to go shopping back in the US. A trade surplus is like US store credits. And so what has happened through the petrodollar system, and then you have the 2008 financial crisis, what has happened is American exceptionalism has been funded pretty much entirely by the trade surplus of foreign trading partners. The reason the US stock market is the biggest in the world is because all of China's trade surplus is plowed into it. The reason that US real estate is like so expensive, and you can buy a condo in Manhattan for $250 million. Guys, what reasonable human that grew up in New York needs a $250 million condo? But when you watch the Netflix shows of them trying to sell it, they never once talk to an American. Call Russia, call China. Seriously. So you have these guys. China hasn't added their net position of treasuries since 2014. So the dollar now is backed by the most desirable goods in America. The dollar is now backed by the Mag 7, the nicest real estate, and the nicest farmland. And now all of a sudden, when you realize, oh, we're living in America, the largest wealth gap in American history. Why? Because foreign trading partners are bidding up all the scarce desirable assets, and everyone else is getting poorer in real terms. They're getting poorer in real estate terms, in gold terms, in Bitcoin terms, in Mag 7 terms. And so then we have an election in Donald Trump where he wins by popular vote, by the way. Insane. Red sweep.
Yeah.
Because the majority of the country is getting obliterated and is poor in real terms. And this kind of monetary era of printing, doing no work, printing pieces of paper, and in return getting real stuff, and letting these pieces of paper that we're exporting come back in and bid away a quality of life for all of our people, like it's ran its course, and the people are voting like, please save us. So that's where I think we are. And the way that the US saves itself is it has to expunge and debase the debt, and we have to go back to a neutral reserve, currency. Like, the last thing I'll say, and I hope all this is making sense, you guys will ask me questions or let me know, but China imported 1,000 tons of gold last year. Okay. So they're not buying treasuries. They're buying Mag 7. They're buying farmland in the US. They're buying real estate, kind of, and they're buying a lot of gold. Okay. If gold was $20,000 an ounce, China ran a neutral trade. They didn't run a trade surplus, right? So if what Trump is trying to solve is reduce the trade surplus, reduce the wealth gap in the United States, right? To me, that means gold is severely undervalued. Bitcoin is severely undervalued. The dollar is severely overvalued. I can solve the United States problem in 10 seconds. The problem is, I don't know how to get you reelected, but I can solve your problem. Don't be the world reserve currency. The dollar won't be artificially strong. US assets won't be artificially strong. Gold will rip. Bitcoin will rip. China will import 1,000 tons of gold next year, and they'll have no trade surplus to come and ruin the inner fabric of your country. And the dollar will go down to its natural level, and you will finally have a currency where it's reasonable to have manual labor to produce stuff here. But when you hyper financialize the US markets, where, everyone in the United States is focused on margins, is focused on their stock price, they have to employ labor in China. The US dollar is too strong. So anyways, that's my macro thesis. I think we're unwinding from the post-World War era. I think it's ran its course. I think the US needs desperately neutral reserve assets that it can debase the dollar against, and that we can transition to, because it's, the inner fabric of this country. I mean, every KPI that you care about in the United States is bad. Like life expectancy, flat to down. Obesity, metabolic disease, cancer growth, like divorce rate. It's a like society is deteriorating rapidly. And I think gold and Bitcoin will play a role in stabilizing America through dollar debasement.
I think there's another aspect of this as well, which is all of these countries like China, like the EU, Russia, they're increasingly seeing that they don't want to be playing on America's terms, because you can just wake up and be kicked out of the financial system, right? For better or for worse, you want to make the decision, you want someone else to make the decision for you. So yeah, I think like naturally, a lot of these countries are going to find ways to wean themselves off the dollar. Alternatives to SWIFT is emerging amongst BRIC countries. So I think a lot of that, I'm on the same page. I am curious, right? Because I think there's like obviously an outcome here where the US adopts Bitcoin as this neutral reserve currency and pays back its debt and things are great. But is that a scenario where the US is setting itself up for an unfair advantage again? No, not as much, right? But I am curious about the world in which the US is effectively, and this is kind of what's happening, first to market. Yes, El Salvador bought Bitcoin, but it doesn't have buying power of the United States, can't make as much of an asymmetric bet on Bitcoin. But I think if the US does make this bet, right, accumulates a substantial portion of Bitcoin, positions itself very strongly, and runs back to Marshall Plan, right, with all these other countries that are not doing so well, but in Bitcoin, we can even call it the Mahler's Plan. I had that joke. I wanted to line it up for a minute now.
I love it.
So I am curious to see how how deeply the US will dip its toe in Bitcoin, and in a world in which it basically cannibalizes itself and just out innovates itself, which is very rare. We've almost never seen an incumbent purposely cannibalize its own business because it knows someone else is going to come and kill it.
Firstly, again, it's obvious, but the biggest piece is you can't print Bitcoins. That's the biggest difference. So is the United States going to remain powerful? I'm definitely not calling for the death of, the empire, or if it will unwind, it's not going to be like next year. But I do fundamentally believe that the U.S. has found itself in a position where it benefits from a weaker dollar. Like, the rare earth situation, the U.S. cannot go to war right now. So this is beyond like left, right, blue, red, Bitcoin or not. This is a national security threat at the US level. Is we cannot defend ourselves if China decides how long we go to war right now. And so it's about being able to produce our own stuff, being able to defend ourselves, being able to produce our own military equipment. And so for me, the US has found itself in a structural position where a weaker dollar is of national security. A higher Bitcoin and higher gold price is of national security. And so I do understand the idea that people, the intuition of like, well, they're not going to do that because they're destroying the very, system they created that's gotten them to this point. But I think there's a lot of room in between that to where, a gold price of $20,000 an ounce and a Bitcoin price of $1 million a Bitcoin or whatever that number is, does not mean that, trade still won't be priced in dollars, does not mean it. All it means is that, the global trade surplus that other countries like China are running are greatly reduced. I mean, what is Trump trying to do? He's flirted with capital controls. He's flirted with tariffs. All of this is just reducing the surplus other countries are running, which is going to help with the wealth gap in the United States of America, help with, how artificially strong the dollar is, all of these things. So I think there's like a logical next step, which is, the US supporting Bitcoin growth and working. And, the stablecoin thing for me, it's a Bitcoin play. Like,
yeah,
you guys want to know, like, I'll tell the US this, you guys want to grow the issuance of Tether, send Bitcoin to 500,000. We could sit here and we could talk all the time about, what stablecoins are doing in emerging markets, and that's all true and well. But like stablecoins are the reserve pair against the 5th largest asset in the world. So yeah. you want more stablecoin issuance, which is more T-bill demand, send Bitcoin to 500,000. And then it's like, okay, well, if I'm going to debase the dollar, I'll tell you what, Trump, do not debase the dollar against housing. If housing starts ripping 60% CAGR, bad idea. People are going to be pissed. Do not debase the dollar against eggs. If groceries start ripping 60% CAGR, bad idea. Debase it against gold and Bitcoin. And if you need to print money and hide inflation, put all the extra liquidity in stablecoins. Send Bitcoin to 500,000. All the liquidity goes into stablecoins. And then if I was the US government, I would say, well, shoot, I need to make sure that the average American participates in this dollar debasement. Like, it'd be really bad if all these crypto bros sitting in an empty closet named Jack were the ones that benefited from all this dollar debasement and the gold and Bitcoin ripping. And so then you see Donald Trump proposing an executive order that opens up the American savings, opens up 401ks, and he's proposing to dump bonds and stocks out of 401ks and introduce allocation to Bitcoin and gold. So if I was the United States of America, I would go into everyone's savings account, dump their bonds, dump their stocks, buy Bitcoin, buy gold, send Bitcoin and gold higher, which is going to allow me to finance deficits at the front end because, all the stable coins are going to 10x in issuance, and I'll be able to issue a lot of T-bills. And so I think that version of the future is not like the US sacrificing the fiat like hegemony that they, right? I think that's like a very logical way to solve the problems they have now. And I think that's actually how politicians think. No one is incented in America to think 20 years from now. They're trying to get reelected. And I think that's what we're living through today. Like that FT article just came out. Donald Trump proposes an executive order to go in and rotate some of your stocks and your bonds into Bitcoin and gold, probably before they revalue the gold on America's balance sheet, and Bitcoin rips and Tether becomes like $1 trillion company. Like that's like how it read to me.
A world in which you see Bitcoin as this global reserve currency, do you think the odds of a separated America is higher or lower? Like, do you see a world in which, again, there's 50 states in the US, and there's a couple things that back and the 50 states. But I'm just curious, a world of Bitcoin, do you see a world where, maybe some of those states want to be their own country? Do you think the odds are higher?
I've never been asked that. That's a good question. I don't know. I would actually say the odds would be lower. I'm just guessing, but my logic is that, money, society is only as strong and hard as its money. And hard, for the listeners, that's a direct reference of how hard is it to produce more of it. And so obviously dollar, very easy money. And so I think it's really deteriorated society. I think it's divided the country in every metric. Like literally the divorce rate in America is over 50%. So more than half of sitting America right now, their families are decimated and ruined. Like I grew up, I mean, this is now public. I talked about it in a keynote in Prague. I grew up in a divorce, like really changed me. And so whether it's divorce, whether it's blue and red, whether it's, socialism versus like so I think a better money actually will do really well in uniting the country again. I think a lot of our issues are rooted in the fact that our money is so bad. So that's my logic. But this is an on the fly answer, so who knows? I've thought about it for about 15 seconds.
Jack, let's shift the pitch a little bit to treasury companies. You're probably the most relevant person to ever have on outside of Sailor talk about this stuff. What's your thesis about these in general? Why should someone, own shares of a company that holds Bitcoin versus holding Bitcoin directly? And how do these companies, including 21, plan to differentiate themselves from MicroStrategy and other firms? There's now like tens of them already. So curious kind of about your views and what led you to deciding to run one.
Yeah, well, I think just on the thesis of why would you be an investor in one of these businesses and own a share? For me, it's like anything else. It's an operating company and you are interested in their future performance. And so the interesting thing about these businesses is they denominate that performance in Bitcoin. So it is a way to get wealthier in Bitcoin terms. I think that's what all shareholders, they all share that commonality, whether you're a strategy shareholder or Metaplanet shareholders, that you're looking to get wealthier in Bitcoin terms. Now, whether the business is going to be able to achieve that and whether their share price at this moment of talking to you guys is rich or poor relative to Bitcoin, I obviously can't speak to that, and you guys probably can't either, right? I don't know, but the core idea is that businesses are now using Bitcoin as the hurdle rate. They're measuring returns in Bitcoin, and they're offering a new class of investors a way to be performant in Bitcoin terms, which I think is what Michael Saylor and Strategy really pioneered, this idea of thinking of the world in Bitcoin and denominating companies' performance in Bitcoin, and all the way down to their literal equity. Like, they value their equity less than they do Bitcoin. And that was like a very novel, interesting concept. I think for us at 21, we definitely are a treasury company, as you just said it. But I would wage to say we don't really think of ourselves in that way. For Paulo and I, listen, the 21 board is comprised of SoftBank, Tether, and myself, and my background is Strike, obviously. We feel like there's nothing we can't do. We have every opportunity to do, anything, and we plan to do all of those things. And so we definitely don't, want to restrict how the world views us and how we view ourselves as, this idea of a treasury company that's just very strictly going to manage how much leverage it has, how it's delevering itself through an ATM. Like, that's absolutely part of our strategy, and we're very excited about that. But there's just so much more to who we are. And so I definitely don't want to categorize us it just simply in that way. And so I think that's one of the main ways we'll differentiate ourselves, is that we care deeply about our operating business and what we're building. And we think that there's a lot more opportunity in being part of the capital markets and having such a big balance sheet of Bitcoin. And at the end of the day, for us, it's allowing the capital markets to participate in this Bitcoin story with a company that's performing in Bitcoin. So our metrics are a little different. We have the Bitcoin per share and Bitcoin return rate. So my job is to grow those. And we think we're going to be able to do that not only through financial engineering in the capital markets, but we also plan on building lots of software and lots of products. And there's other opportunities for us, we believe, to go out and be the best way for someone in the capital markets to participate in this Bitcoin story.
And can you tell us a little bit about kind of the stage where the company is right now? How the SPAC worked, just high level, just so our listeners kind of understand how this entire process works. You guys obviously raised some cash, you raised a bunch of Bitcoin, and you plan to acquire more Bitcoin on top of obviously building services, software, and all that you just mentioned. How does that entire process work? And was that something that was exciting for you, or is it a huge pain in the ass to go through this process? It seems like it's already going on for months and must be huge amounts of paperwork and all that. So I'm just curious kind of how that's for you.
Yeah, I mean, all of the above. Every day that I've been alive, there's good parts and there's bad parts. So I don't think there's, a clean answer. But I think on net, it's been one of the cooler experiences of my life. And I feel I think we all at 21 feel very fortunate for the present time that we're living through and the role that we could play in it. Where the business is we filed with an intent to merge and go public via SPAC, as you mentioned, in April. We recently released a press release and let the world know that we had confidentially filed our S4 with the SEC. So there's obviously an announcement and an intent, and then there's actually filing, and now we are in that review process with the SEC. So we're hopeful that the approval, which would allow us to list XXI, our stock, on a stock exchange, we're hopeful that that's imminent. We're excited. We think it could be as soon as this quarter. But we'll see, obviously. Really what we care most about, and this is genuine, is that the SEC and everyone involved understands our business, understands what we're trying to do. And we took a very, very clean approach. So I think you also asked how this came about and why we did it this way. I mean, when Tether and I decided we wanted to co-found this business and be the change that we wanted to see in the capital markets when it came to Bitcoin. Obviously the first step was, how do we want to enter the capital markets? And there's a direct listing and there's SPAC. And even within SPAC, there's, nasty SPACs that have all sorts of redemptions and bad clauses and position the business in a really ugly way. And so we took our time and just deeply understanding what would be both best for us, our mission, and putting ourselves in the best position to achieve success. And then also what would be best for the capital markets, for Bitcoin, for the SEC. So we partnered with Cantor on that. Cantor is our SPAC partner, Cantor Equity Partners. And it's been a process. We're almost done. And I don't know if that answered your questions, but we're excited.
And we're nearing the end, but how do you split your time between what you're doing at Strike and now 21? And is that going to be your main focus?
Oh, no. What's funny is, so I would call him a mentor, like an older brother almost, is Jack Dorsey a little bit. And I mean, above all of those things, is like just a really good friend. But definitely someone I've looked up to my whole life. And I called him when I was seriously considering starting this business, because he's run 2 companies before, at a very serious scale in Square and Twitter. And it was interesting because the first thing he said to me was, well, you've got it way better than me, man, because I was running a social network and then I was running like a payments acquirer. They're 2 totally different things with 2 totally different, like, you're just working on Bitcoin. And so, that's my answer to this question always, is I wake up and I just work on Bitcoin. It's been that way for the last 13 years almost, and it's still that way today. Now, obviously, it's a little bit different having 2 separate businesses, but you guys would be surprised at how not complicated that is. Both teams are unbelievably good. Both businesses are unbelievably well positioned. And my job really is to just wake up and do what's best, not only for Bitcoin, but then obviously to position the businesses to be successful. And so a lot of the times there's overlap there. Like, for example, would you guys say that this is a podcast that's educating the audience on Strike or 21 or Bitcoin or all the above? And so I feel very lucky in that respect. And it's actually a lot easier than, people give me way too much credit. They think that like I'm out here like a robot, like doing the impossible. That's probably more Elon Musk than me. I'm just working on Bitcoin.
Well, Jack, it's been a pleasure to have you on. Is there any closing thought you want our listeners to come away with?
No, man, this was fun. I really enjoyed it. Thank you guys for having me. Wide ranging, and I enjoyed it.
Thanks so much. Yeah, time flew by. We wanted to talk a little bit more about 21, but we got carried away. So appreciate your time. This was one of the most exciting episodes we've ever recorded, and I've ever recorded on other podcasts. So appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
Have a good one, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate your time.
You too, guys.